Let me paint you a picture. It's a Florida morning, the kind where the air is so thick with salt and humidity you can practically drink it. The sun is just starting to burn through the haze over the water, turning the whole harbor a hazy, promising gold. I was out on my workboat, putting the finishing touches on a new mooring ball. Not just any mooring ball, this one was my own design, built to last 100 years. Over-engineered maybe, but I'm an old-school lineman. I believe in things you can count on. I was just tightening the last shackle, feeling that satisfying bite of steel on steel when I heard it. A high-pitched whine, like a mosquito the size of a dinner plate. I looked up. A drone. It hovered about 20 feet above my head. A sterile white piece of plastic with a black, unblinking eye for a camera. It felt wrong, like finding a security camera in your own shower. This happened to me, and if you're watching Karenology, you know it's never just about a misunderstanding. A moment later, I saw him, striding down the main pier like he owned it. He was young, maybe 30, dressed in the kind of expensive minimalist clothes that are supposed to look casual but scream money. Crisp white shirt, tailored linen pants, shoes with no socks. He was holding a tablet, and his face had the smug, placid smile of someone who has never had to fix anything with his own two hands. This, I would soon learn, was Julian. He stopped at the edge of the pier, not even bothering to raise his voice over the lapping waves. The drone did it for him, its speaker crackling to life. "Mr. Mark," the tinny voice said, a perfect echo of the man's condescending tone. "That mooring device is in violation of community aesthetic standards." I just stared at him. Aesthetic standards? My buoy was a piece of solid functional engineering. It was painted a clean, functional white. It was there so I could safely moor my boat and get to the undersea power lines that keep this whole town running. What was he even talking about? He held up his tablet, and the drone dipped lower, projecting an image onto the deck of my boat. It was a digital fine, $250 for visual pollution. "We're building the port of the future, Mark," Julian said, his real voice finally carrying across the water. His smile never wavered. "Your industrial junk is holding us back." He gestured around the harbor with a sweep of his hand. "This is a premium lifestyle community now. We have an image to maintain." His organization, the Clear Harbor Initiative, was supposedly a non-profit dedicated to making the port beautiful and sustainable. Funny, their version of sustainable looked a lot like pushing out anyone who did actual work. My hand went to my belt, my fingers finding the smooth, worn handle of my father's old wrench. It's been with me on every job for 30 years. A piece of solid American steel, a symbol of a time when things were built to work, not just to look good on an investor's brochure. I felt a slow burn starting in my chest. You ever get that feeling? Like someone is trying to erase your whole world, one polite, soulless sentence at a time? I didn't say a word. I just looked from his smug face to the buzzing drone, then down at the fine projected on my deck. $250. For doing my job, for existing. If you appreciate stories where the little guy doesn't just roll over, hit that like button, because I was about to find out this was just the beginning. Later that day, I went to see Dave, the harbor master. Dave's a good man, old school like me. His office smells of stale coffee and brine, and the walls are covered in tide charts, not modern art. I told him about Julian and the drone. He just laughed, a deep belly laugh that shook his whole frame. "Visual pollution," he boomed, slapping his desk. "Mark, that buoy of yours is the only one in this harbor rated for a Category 4. It's a piece of safety equipment. Tell that little punk to go pound sand." I felt a wave of relief. Of course. This was nonsense. A rich kid on a power trip. Dave was the authority here, not some slick initiative. We talked for a while longer, about the good old days, about the changing face of the town. I left his office feeling a hell of a lot better. The world still made sense. But here's the thing about the new world. It moves while you're sleeping. That night, the power went out. Not a flicker, a solid dead stop. The whole town plunged into a sudden, shocking darkness. My lineman's instincts kicked in immediately. I was already reaching for my boots, my mind running through the grid schematics. But just as quickly as it went out, it came back on, maybe a minute later. An unsettling system-wide hiccup. It felt deliberate. It felt wrong. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, then buzzed again, and again. I picked it up. It was the town's community Facebook group blowing up with posts, and right at the top, a slick, professionally produced video from the Clear Harbor Initiative. It showed dark homes, confused residents, and then cut to Julian's confident face. "Tonight's outage is a stark reminder," he said, his voice smooth and urgent. "Our town's infrastructure is old, it's failing, it's time for a change." Then came the graphics, showing off his company's proposed smart grid. A beautiful, seamless, futuristic solution. The comments poured in, fear, anger, and praise for Julian, the man with the plan. I scrolled down, my blood turning to ice. Another post. A picture of my workboat, tethered to my new buoy. The caption read, "It starts with small things. Obsolete equipment, operated by people stuck in the past, is putting us all at risk." They were using me. They had created a crisis, and now they were making me the face of the problem. And on my phone, a new notification lit up the dark. An emergency town council meeting scheduled for the next day. The subject line had only 5 words. Vote on the Clear Harbor Initiative. That notification burned on my screen like a brand, an emergency meeting. They were moving fast, too fast. This wasn't democracy. It was a blitzkrieg with spreadsheets and social media. Sleep was out of the question. I pulled on my worn leather boots, the ones molded to my feet from 30 years of climbing poles and wading through storm surge. The air outside still had that electric tang, the ghost of ozone left after a power surge. It's a smell I know better than my own name, but this time it smelled like a setup. I didn't go back to bed. I went to the substation. It's a lonely place at night, just the hum of transformers and the blinking of status lights. I'm probably the only person in this town who finds that sound comforting. I pulled the logs from last night's event. My hands moved with a certainty born of habit, flipping through screens of data that would look like gibberish to anyone else. And there it was. It wasn't a failure, it was a transfer spike, a deliberate surgical redirect of power that created a momentary overload. And the epicenter of that spike, the line feeding directly into the town's water desalination plant. The single most critical piece of infrastructure we have. This wasn't a random outage. This was an attack, a carefully planned demonstration of how fragile everything was. It was a threat, disguised as an accident. The next morning, I found him. Julian was holding court in the town's trendy new coffee shop, the kind of place with exposed brick and reclaimed wood that charges you $5 for a cup of black coffee. He was surrounded by a few of his young, eager followers, all nodding along as he talked about a brighter, greener future. The place was filled with the smell of burnt coffee and self-satisfaction. I didn't wait. I walked right up to his table, my muddy boots leaving tracks on their polished concrete floor. The chatter died down. Every eye in the place was on me. "The power outage," I said, my voice low and steady. "That was you." Julian looked up at me. Not with surprise, but with a kind of weary patience, like a teacher dealing with a slow student. "Mark, isn't it? I understand you're upset about the changes." "Don't play dumb with me," I cut him off, my voice louder now. The clatter of ceramic cups stopped. "I saw the logs. That was a targeted spike at the desalination plant. You knocked out the power on purpose to scare people into buying your snake oil." He let out a short, humorless laugh. He stood up, placing himself between me and his followers, a shepherd protecting his flock from the big bad wolf. "Friends," he said, addressing the room, "this is exactly what I was talking about. Fear of the future, fear of progress." He turned back to me, his eyes full of fake pity. "Mark, with all due respect, you're an electrician. You fix things when they break. But you don't understand the bigger picture. Our system is outdated. It's vulnerable. Last night was a warning sign from a dying grid, not a conspiracy." The room was silent. I could feel their eyes on me, this old man in muddy boots ranting about conspiracies. He made me sound like a lunatic. Have you ever been in a situation where you know you're telling the absolute truth, but the way it comes out, the way they look at you, makes you doubt your own sanity? "You're a liar," I said, but the words had no force. The conviction in my own voice was gone, drowned out by the silent judgment of the crowd. He had won. He hadn't even raised his voice. A man in the corner, a local journalist who'd been typing on his laptop, just smirked and shook his head, clearly enjoying the show. He saw a crazy old coot, a perfect little human interest story to mock in his next column. Across the room, though, I saw Anna. She was the town librarian, a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. She wasn't smirking. She was watching, and she looked curious. Julian gave me one last dismissive nod. We all respect your years of service, Mark, but maybe it's time to let the next generation lead. He turned his back on me, and the conversation at his table resumed, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the floor, humiliated, obsolete. I walked out of there, the bell over the door jingling mockingly behind me. I just stood on the sidewalk for a minute, the morning sun feeling too bright. As I headed back to my truck, I passed the old hardware store. Bill, the owner, was out front, sweeping. He's a man of few words. He watched me approach, his face unreadable. He just nodded at me, a quick, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. As I passed, he quietly said, "Saw that in there. Rough business." It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a lifeline. Back in my truck, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. The smooth, worn leather felt alien in my hands. I'd lost. I'd played my only card, and he'd turned it into a joke. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I think you might be right. I can help you look for proof." Anna, from the library. A tiny spark of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely alone in this. But then another email came through. This one was official. It was from the harbor's new homeowners association, which I was beginning to realize was just another arm of Julian's initiative. The subject line was cold and final. Final notice, unsanctioned mooring device. The message was short. My buoy, my solid, over-engineered, perfectly safe buoy, was to be removed within 24 hours. Or they would have it removed for me, and I would be billed for the cost. That final notice felt like a punch to the gut. 24 hours. It wasn't a request. It was an eviction notice from my own life's work. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold and deep, it felt like it was freezing my blood. They weren't just coming for my buoy anymore. They were coming for my access, for my ability to do my job. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. I ignored the notice, let them try. Instead, I drove over to the library. It was a quiet refuge from the buzz of the town, smelling of old paper and floor wax. Anna was waiting for me near the public computers, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice a low whisper. I started digging as soon as I left the coffee shop. Julian's Clear Harbor initiative isn't what it seems. She turned her computer screen toward me. My tech skills are for power grids, not the internet, but I could understand what I was seeing. The initiative was legally structured as a shell company, and its funding didn't come from local donors. It came from a single source, a massive venture capital firm, a firm whose name I recognized. They were sharks. They specialized in what they called utility privatization. What that really means is they find towns in trouble, buy up their essential services, water, power, sanitation, and then squeeze every last penny out of the residents. "They're not here to make the harbor pretty, Mark," Anna said, her eyes wide. "They're here to buy it." It all clicked into place. The fake power outage, the media blitz, the pressure campaign. It was a corporate playbook, executed with chilling precision. They were manufacturing a crisis to make the town council so desperate they'd hand over the keys to the kingdom. My little mooring buoy was a problem for them, not because it was ugly, but because it was in their way. It represented independent access, my access. "There's more," she said, clicking to another screen. It was a technical document, a patent filing. "This is for his smart grid. Look at this." She pointed to a section buried deep in the legal jargon. It described an encrypted activation key required for all major system functions, including manual overrides. "What does that mean?" I asked, leaning closer. "It means," she said, her voice barely audible, "that once it's installed, only they can control it. No local access, no manual bypass. If their system goes down in a hurricane, and they can't or won't fix it remotely, we're completely dark. We're hostages. Have you ever seen the blueprint for your own prison? That's what it felt like. Staring at that patent, I saw the future Julian was building for us. A future where we paid a subscription fee for our own lights, our own water, A future where a man in an office 1,000 miles away could flip a switch and turn our town back to the dark ages. And then I saw the real problem, the real reason my buoy was a threat. I pulled out a folded grease-stained schematic from my wallet. It was the master plan for the harbor's undersea lines. I spread it out on the desk, the old paper crinkling under my calloused fingers. "Here," I said, pointing with a thick finger. "This is the main trunk line. It's the high-voltage cable that feeds the whole town, including the desalination plant." My finger traced the line out from the shore to a specific point in the channel. "And this," I tapped the map, "is the primary junction box, the one place where you can manually isolate the plant from the rest of the grid in an emergency. It's 50 feet underwater." I looked up at Anna, letting the weight of it sink in. "And it's directly underneath my mooring buoy." Her eyes widened in understanding. "So, without your buoy?" "Without my buoy," I finished for her, "there's no safe, stable way to access that box, especially not in a storm. Their smart grid plan? They didn't just ignore this junction. They're trying to make it impossible to reach. They're eliminating the off switch." We sat there in silence for a moment, the only sound the quiet hum of the library's fluorescent lights. We had the truth. We knew the what and the why. But what good was it? Julian had the town council eating out of his hand. He had the media on his side. We had a schematic and a patent filing. It was our word against his multi-million-dollar PR machine. I thanked Anna, folding my schematic and putting it back in my wallet. It felt heavier now. As I walked out into the afternoon sun, a plan started to form in my mind, a risky, desperate plan. If they wanted to make me the villain, the obsolete old man standing in the way of progress, then maybe it was time I started acting the part. That evening, I got another call. It was Dave, the harbor master. His voice was strained. "Mark, I'm sorry. I tried to stop it. They went over my head. The council just voted. They've given Julian's group emergency authority over harbor maintenance, effective immediately." He paused. "They're coming for your buoy in the morning, with a cutting crew." The line went dead, but I kept the phone to my ear, listening to the dial tone. It was the sound of my world shrinking, of doors slamming shut one by one. A cutting crew. They weren't just going to remove it. They were going to destroy it. And in that moment, I knew there was no more room for talk. The time for being reasonable was over. The storm they'd been faking was about to become very, very real. A cutting crew. The words echoed in my head. They weren't just taking away a piece of equipment. They were amputating a part of me, a part of the town's own safety net. My father's wrench felt heavy on my hip, no longer a comfort, but a dead weight. I looked out my window at the harbor. The lights of the town glittered on the dark water, beautiful and fragile, and I was the only one who knew just how fragile. But what could I do? They had the law, the money, and the town council on their side. I was just one man. One obsolete old man, just like Julian had said. For a long moment, I thought about giving up, just letting them have it. What was the point? The town had already made its choice. Maybe it was time to just retire, fade away. Then my phone rang. It was my daughter, Sarah. She lives a few states away, a world away. We don't talk as much as we should. My fault, mostly. I'm better with wires than with words. "Dad?" she said, her voice tight with worry. "I saw an article online, something about a power grid controversy in your town. It mentioned you. It made you sound, I don't know, angry." I could hear the unspoken question. "Are you okay, Dad? Are you going off the rails again?" Years ago, after her mother passed, I threw myself into my work. It was the only way I knew how to cope. I worked every storm, every outage, pushing myself to the breaking point. Sarah saw it as me choosing my job over her, over my own grief. Maybe she was right. And now, here I was again, picking a fight I couldn't win, neglecting everything else. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, but my voice was rough. "Just some local politics, nothing to worry about." "It doesn't sound like nothing," she said softly. "Dad, please be careful. You don't have to fight every battle." We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation circling around the real issue without ever touching it. After we hung up, I just sat there in the dark. You don't have to fight every battle. She was right, but she was also wrong. Some battles you don't choose. They choose you, and if you run from them, you're not just losing a fight, you're losing a piece of yourself. That phone call, it didn't make me want to back down. It did the opposite. It reminded me what I was fighting for. Not just a power grid, not just a town. I was fighting for the idea that some things are worth protecting, that experience matters, that you can't let the fast-talking salesman burn down the world just to sell you a fire extinguisher. A new kind of resolve settled over me, hard and clear as glass. Okay, Julian, you want my buoy? You can have it, but you're going to get it my way. I spent the next few hours in my workshop. The familiar smells of oil, metal, and ozone calmed my nerves. I worked methodically, gathering tools and components. I wasn't building a weapon, I was building a lesson. A very loud, very public lesson in cause and effect. As dawn broke, a new weather alert started scrolling across the local news channel. A tropical depression had formed overnight and was strengthening faster than expected. It was still a ways out, but it was heading our way. A real storm was coming. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Right on schedule, a sleek white work barge motored into the harbor. The Clear Harbor Initiative logo emblazoned on its side. On board were 3 men in crisp new uniforms, and, of course, Julian, watching from the helm like a conquering admiral. They pulled up alongside my buoy, their movements efficient and impersonal. I was already in my own boat, moored 100 feet away, just watching. I didn't yell, I didn't protest. I just sat there, a thermos of coffee in my hand, and watched them work. It drove them crazy. They kept glancing over at me, expecting a confrontation. I gave them nothing, just a quiet, steady gaze. One of the workers attached a heavy industrial cutter to the base of the buoy. The hydraulic jaws, designed to shear through thick steel, closed around the mooring chain. Julian gave the signal. The operator hit the switch. And that's when everything changed. The moment the cutter's jaws bit into the chain, it completed a circuit I had spent half the night rigging. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't dangerous. It was just a switch. A switch that sent a specific controlled low-voltage signal down a wire I had secretly run along the harbor floor. A signal that mimicked the precise frequency of a grid line under extreme stress, the kind of instability that happens just before a catastrophic failure during a major storm. My target wasn't the town's power. It was something much, much smaller. It was the brand new multi-million-dollar control system for Julian's smart grid, which was being staged in a container at the main pier, ready for its grand unveiling at the town hall ceremony later that day. I was giving his perfect system its first real-world test. From my boat, I couldn't see the effect, but I didn't have to. A moment later, I saw Julian's posture change. He stiffened. He snatched a radio from his console, his voice sharp and panicked. The public ceremony was about to begin, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that his miracle grid had just bricked itself. He had walked right into my trap. And the best part, he had no idea how. Up on the barge, chaos erupted. Julian was shouting into his radio, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. The cool, calm tech visionary was gone, replaced by a man watching his perfect plan crumble into dust. The cutting crew looked confused, glancing from their silent hydraulics to their frantic boss. They had cut the chain, just like they were told. My beautiful buoy, my symbol of defiance, tipped sideways and began to sink with a slow, mournful gurgle, disappearing beneath the waves. For a second, a pang of loss shot through me. It felt like watching a friend drown. But there was no time for that. On the pier, I could see 2 of Julian's tech guys running towards the shipping container that housed the brains of his smart grid. They fumbled with the locks, threw open the doors, and disappeared inside. I could imagine the scene in there. Screens flashing red, alarms they couldn't silence, a system that had locked itself down tighter than a drum. Julian's barge motored back to the pier at full speed. He practically leapt onto the dock before it was even tied off and sprinted toward the container. I just sat in my boat, took a slow sip of my coffee, and watched the show. He thought he was the master of this game, but he'd forgotten one simple rule. You never, ever bet against a man who knows the wiring better than you know your own name. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. It was supposed to be Julian's coronation. The mayor, the council, and the local press were all there, ready to celebrate the dawn of a new era. The journalist who had smirked at me in the coffee shop was front and center, his camera ready. He was about to get a much better story than he'd planned. I docked my boat and walked over. The approaching storm was making its presence felt now. The wind had a bite to it, and the sky was the color of a nasty bruise. As I got closer, I saw the journalist talking to a frantic-looking Julian, The reporter, smelling a story, was asking pointed questions. Julian, for his part, was trying to spin it, talking about minor pre-launch diagnostics and standard calibration protocols. The lies were coming fast and furious, but the sweat on his brow told the real story. He saw me approaching, and his eyes narrowed with pure hatred. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew this was my fault. "You!" he hissed, stepping away from the reporter to confront me. "What did you do?" "Me?" I gave him my most innocent look. "I was just sitting in my boat, watching your boys do their job. A very professional crew, by the way. Very efficient." I held up my hands. "I've been out on the water all morning. Plenty of witnesses." It was the perfect trap. He couldn't accuse me of anything without admitting his own system had a catastrophic secret vulnerability. He couldn't explain how a simple linesman in a beat-up boat could wirelessly cripple his multi-million-dollar technology. He was trapped inside his own lie. The reporter, his eyes darting between the two of us, moved closer. "Mr. Julian," he said, his voice slick with professional curiosity, "is there a problem with the new grid? The mayor is waiting." This was the moment, the pivot. The reporter was no longer Julian's fanboy. He was a shark that had tasted blood. Julian's face was pale. "There is no problem," he said through gritted teeth, turning his back on me and striding toward the town hall. "The launch will proceed as scheduled." I had to give him credit for the sheer nerve. He was going to walk into that hall and pretend everything was fine, hoping his tech guys could work a miracle before he had to flip the switch. It was a bold move. It was also a stupid one. I didn't follow him into the hall. My part in that play was over. Instead, I went to find Anna at the library. I told her what I'd done. She stared at me, a look of terrified admiration on her face. "So his system is dead," she whispered. "Worse," I said with a grim smile. "It's not dead. It's in a coma, a self-induced safety coma. It detected what it thinks is massive grid instability, a hurricane-level event. And according to the patent you found, there's only one way to bring it back online." "The encrypted key," she breathed. "Exactly. A key his techs have to get from their headquarters 1,000 miles away. And even then, the system won't reactivate until the danger has passed. My little signal generator is still running, powered by a car battery hidden in a waterproof case on the harbor floor. It'll run for at least 48 hours. I paused, letting her see the whole beautiful, terrible picture. He's going to stand up in front of the whole town and try to launch a system that is physically incapable of turning on. We both knew what would happen next. Public humiliation. The end of his credibility. The collapse of his entire scheme. We had won. Or so I thought. But as we were standing there, basking in the glow of my brilliant plan, my phone rang again. It was Dave, the harbor master. His voice was grim. "Mark, turn on the news. Now." I pulled up the local news feed on Anna's computer. There was Julian, live on the steps of the town hall, giving an impromptu press conference. But he wasn't talking about the grid. He was holding up a piece of metal, a twisted, burned piece of metal. "And this," Julian said, his voice filled with sorrow and outrage, "is what we pulled from the desalination plant's control panel this morning, an act of sabotage, a deliberate attempt to poison this town's water supply. An investigation is already underway, but the evidence points to a disgruntled employee with intimate knowledge of our town's infrastructure." He looked directly into the camera, his face a mask of pained sincerity. "The man who did this is not a hero. He is a terrorist." My blood ran cold. The piece of metal he was holding, I'd never seen it before in my life. He hadn't just anticipated my move. He had set a trap of his own. I had been so focused on his smart grid that I'd missed the real target. He wasn't just trying to discredit me, he was framing me, and the whole town was watching. The word terrorist hung in the air of the quiet library, an obscenity. My plan, my clever little trap, suddenly felt naive and foolish. I was playing checkers while he was playing a whole different game, a game with no rules and no conscience. I had exposed his technology's weakness. He had just branded me an enemy of the state. Have you ever had a moment of victory turn to ash in your mouth so fast it gives you whiplash? Anna stared at the screen, her face white. "He planted that," she whispered. "He must have." "Of course he did," I said, my mind racing. The fake power outage, the one that hit the desalination plant, it wasn't just a demonstration. It was his cover to plant that piece of evidence. He'd been 2 steps ahead of me the entire time. He knew I'd check the logs. He knew I'd find the spike. He wanted me to. He'd led me down a path, made me think I was the one setting the trap, while he was building a cage around me. My phone started buzzing again, but this time it wasn't a call. It was a flood of notifications from the town's social media pages. The video of Julian holding up that piece of scrap metal was everywhere. My face, taken from the coffee shop confrontation, was right next to it. The comments were a torrent of hatred and fear. Traitor! Lock him up. He tried to poison our kids. In the space of 30 seconds, I had gone from a cranky old man to the most hated person in town. I had to get out of there. The library no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the last patch of solid ground before a cliff. I told Anna to go home, to lock her doors, and to delete any messages between us. I didn't want her dragged any further into this. She protested, but she saw the look in my eyes and knew it was useless to argue. I walked out into the wind, which was whipping the palm trees into a frenzy. The world had tilted on its axis. My cleverness had backfired, spectacularly. My reputation was shot. I was a pariah, and worse, I was about to be a fugitive. I knew it was only a matter of time before the sheriff came looking for me. I didn't go home. I went to the one place I knew they wouldn't think to look for me right away, the hardware store. Bill was inside, organizing a display of hurricane shutters. He glanced up as I came in, his face grim. He'd seen the news. "They're coming for you, Mark," he said, not a question. I know. I wasn't there for shelter. I was there for one last desperate idea, an idea so crazy it just might work. "Bill," I said, "I need to ask you a favor, a big one." He just looked at me, waiting. He didn't promise anything. He was a man who weighed his words and his actions carefully. "The journalist," I said. "The one who was at the town hall. What do you know about him?" Bill thought for a moment, wiping his hands on a rag. "Name's Peterson. Ambitious. Thinks he's Woodward or Bernstein. Mostly he's just looking for a big story to get him out of this town and into a real paper. He'll follow any lead if he thinks it'll get him a headline." That was the key. Ambition. Peterson didn't care about the truth. He cared about the story. And right now, the story was about me, the local terrorist. But what if I could give him a better one? "I need you to get a message to him," I said. Tell him the real story is about what happens when the power goes out in a real storm, and the smart grid is the only thing in charge. Tell him the story is about corporate manslaughter waiting to happen, and tell him I can prove it." Bill was silent for a long time, just looking at me. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of risks. Helping me now was dangerous. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, Mark, I'll get him the message." As I turned to leave, he stopped me. "One more thing." He walked to the back of the store and came back with a heavy-duty waterproof flashlight. "You might need this." It wasn't just a flashlight. It was a vote of confidence, a small act of rebellion. I spent the next few hours as a ghost in my own town, sticking to back alleys and shadows, my truck hidden away. The storm was getting closer, the first bands of rain starting to lash down. I made my way to the waterfront, to the now abandoned pier where Julian's team had been working. His multi-million-dollar container was still there, a monument to his arrogance. But it wasn't my target. My target was something much older. Tucked away under the pier, almost completely hidden, was the terminal for the town's old emergency broadcast system. It was an ancient piece of technology, a relic from the Cold War, powered by its own dedicated line. It hadn't been used in 20 years. Everyone, including Julian, had forgotten it was even there. Everyone but me, because I'm the one who maintained it for 30 years. I worked quickly, the wind and rain soaking me to the bone. My fingers, numb with cold, moved with the muscle memory of a lifetime. I wasn't fixing it, I was modifying it, connecting it to a new input source, my source. Just as I was finishing, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Pier 4, midnight, come alone." It was Peterson. He'd taken the bait. The stage was set. The storm was rolling in. And I was about to give a performance that would either save this town or get me sent to prison for the rest of my life. I took my father's wrench from my belt, its steel cool and solid in my hand. It was time to show them what old school really meant. Midnight at Pier 4 was like standing at the end of the world. The storm was no longer approaching, it was here. The wind howled, ripping sheets of rain sideways through the darkness. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the churning, furious sea. It was the kind of night that reminded you just how small you are. I saw the beam of a flashlight cut through the gloom. It was Peterson. He was alone, huddled inside a rain slicker, looking nervous and out of his element. This wasn't a coffee shop anymore. "Okay, Mark," he shouted over the wind. "I'm here. This had better be good. I'm risking my career meeting a wanted man." "The man you're meeting is the only one who can keep this town from going dark for a week," I yelled back. "You want a story? I'm about to give you the biggest one of your life." I didn't waste time with explanations. I led him to the town hall. The building was dark and deserted, locked up for the night. The grand ceremony that was supposed to happen here had been postponed, according to the official statement. In reality, it had been a disaster. Julian had stood at the podium, smiled for the cameras, and when the moment came to flip the ceremonial switch, nothing had happened. Just a dead, humiliating silence. He'd tried to blame it on the approaching storm, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. "What are we doing here?" Peterson demanded, rain dripping from his nose. "You're about to conduct a live interview," I said. I pulled my father's wrench from my belt and used it to pry open a utility panel on the side of the building. Inside was a tangle of wires, my wires. I connected two of them, bypassing the main lock. A moment later, the lights inside the town hall flickered on. Peterson stared at me, his mouth agape. Inside, I led him to the main chamber. It was set up for a broadcast, with a podium and a large screen behind it. "Your story isn't about sabotage, Peterson," I said, my voice echoing in the empty hall. "It's about a fatal design flaw. It's about a company that sold this town a system so smart, it's completely useless in a real emergency." I walked to the podium and plugged my phone into the audio-visual system. On the giant screen behind me, I pulled up the patent Anna had found, the one detailing the encrypted key and the lack of a manual override. "Julian's grid isn't just offline," I explained. "It's locked down. It thinks the storm is a catastrophic failure, and it has put itself into a safe mode. It can't be taken out of without a remote key. A key they don't have. They sold us a car with no steering wheel." Peterson was starting to get it. His reporter's brain was connecting the dots. "So, if the power goes out for real in this storm—" "It stays out," I said, "until the storm passes, until the grid is stable, until a guy in an office 1,000 miles away decides we can have our lights back. What if he can't? What if their servers go down? We're stranded." Just then, as if on cue, the lights in the hall flickered and died. The whole town plunged into blackness once again. The storm had finally knocked out the main power line. We were in the exact scenario I had described. A town with a useless smart grid in the middle of a hurricane, in total darkness. "Now for the proof," I said into the black. I pulled out the heavy flashlight Bill had given me and clicked it on. I led Peterson back outside, to the base of the town's old emergency broadcast antenna. "Everyone forgot about this," I said, my voice rising over the storm. "A relic, obsolete, but for 30 years, I kept it running, because you never know." I pulled open the panel I had rewired earlier. "Julian is a master of lies and PR, but you can't lie to a circuit. He can't control this." I flipped a single heavy switch. There was a hum, a crackle of static, and then, across the town, the old air raid sirens sputtered to life. But they weren't wailing. Instead, my voice recorded earlier boomed from the speakers, echoing through the dark and stormy streets. "This is Mark," the recording said. "I have not sabotaged anything. Your power is out because the new smart grid you were sold is a failure. It has shut itself down and cannot be rebooted. You have been sold a lie by a man named Julian and his company. They have taken your money and left you in the dark, but there is still a backup. There is still a manual override for the desalination plant. I am the only one who knows how to use it. Your choice." The recording looped, my voice a ghost in the machine, a message from the past saving the future. Peterson was just standing there, his flashlight beam illuminating my face, his jaw slack with shock. He wasn't seeing a terrorist. He was seeing the story of a lifetime, a story of corporate greed, of manufactured crisis, and of one old lineman who refused to be erased. The aftermath was swift. My broadcast, carried over a system everyone had forgotten, became the only source of truth in the darkness. Faced with a town full of angry, frightened people, the council had no choice. They called me, begging me to restore power to the water plant. The charges were dropped. The investigation turned on Julian. Peterson's story, complete with my technical explanations and a scathing expose of the venture capital firm, went national. Julian and his company were ruined. The contract was nullified. They were sued by the town for fraud. My name was cleared. I was a hero. A few weeks later, I was back out on the water. The sun was shining. The harbor was calm. I was teaching a small group of young apprentices, a new generation of linemen, how to maintain the old, reliable grid, the one we were now upgrading my way. One of my best students was a sharp young woman named Anna. I handed my father's wrench to the most promising of the young men. Trust steel more than you trust software, I told him. He took it with a reverence that made me proud. Later that evening, my daughter Sarah called. "I saw the new article, Dad," she said. "The one in the big paper. I'm proud of you." There was a warmth in her voice I hadn't heard in years. "But," she added softly, "you were out in a hurricane again. You risked everything. Again." She was right. I had won the battle for the town. I had my reputation back. I had even taken a step toward fixing things with my daughter. But as I stood there, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and purple, I knew the cost. I had repaired the town's power grid, but the lines to my own family were still fragile, still in need of a lineman's careful touch. Some repairs just take longer than others. If you've ever had to fight for what's right and paid a price for it, let me know in the comments, because you're not alone.